Welcome to the Berean Call podcast. I'm T.A. McMahon, TBC's Executive Director. We're currently re-airing a discussion I had with Dave Hunt in 2003 featuring his book, Countdown to the Second Coming. What exactly are the last days? That's the question Dave addresses and gives different perspectives, which he compares with what the scriptures teach. Related to that is the question of what the Bible means when it uses the term generation pertaining to the last days. This episode is loaded with related questions such as where does the rapture fit in? And did the apostles believe they were going to be raptured? Dave didn't think so, which he supports with a number of Bible verses. Those questions and much more are just ahead. We're going through Dave Hunt's book, Countdown to the Second Coming, and we're in Chapter 4, and we'll be covering, as time permits, these topics regarding the last days. Didn't Peter and John write that they were in the last days? And that was nearly 2,000 years ago. The signs of the last days are warnings for Israel, not the church. Jesus declared, "When ye shall see all these things, know that that is the second coming, is near, even at the doors, and our generation is the first to have all these signs within reach." And Dave, I could go on with some of the signs. We'll see how far we get, but we're going to cover as many of the signs as we can. So let's go back to Peter and John. Skeptics say they said that they were in the last days, and that was 2,000 years ago.
Well, John did say, "Beloved, it is the last time." And we know that because there are many antichrists, but we know that Antichrist is yet to come. People often say that Peter, Paul, and so forth expected to be raptured. So if they expected to be raptured and they weren't raptured, why should we be expecting it now? Mm-hmm. In fact, and Tom, I can't remember, the older I get, the worse my memory becomes. I can't remember whether we have talked about that before, but they did not think they would be raptured. That's interesting. In Acts 20, Paul said, "After my departing, grievous wolves will enter in, not sparing the flock." He told Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 4, "The time of my departure is at hand." He said, "I've fought a good fight, I've finished my course, I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give to those who love him in that day." All those that love his appearing have that crown waiting for them. And Peter, 2 Peter chapter 1, very clearly said, "I will endeavor that after my decease you will have all these things in remembrance." That's why he put it in writing. So if they knew they weren't going to be raptured, why would they tell the church to look for it? Well, because, again, and Tom, you correct me if I'm wrong, I may be way off base. I've never heard anybody else say this, and I don't know why. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, Paul says, "We apostles are the last appointed unto death." Now, it's appointed unto man once to die. Mm-hmm. So you'd say, well, it's appointed unto everybody to die, isn't it? Well, yes, but we could be raptured. So everybody doesn't have to die. But Paul said, we must die. And the reason the apostles had to die, they were special witnesses. They died testifying to facts, and not one of them begged for his life and said, "Guys, don't kill me. I'll tell you the truth. We stole his body, hid it in Peter's basement, and we made the whole thing up." No one is fool enough to die for what he knows is a lie. And all of the apostles, with the possible exception of John, we're not sure, went to their deaths as martyrs. For what? For testifying to facts. They said he did rise from the dead. He did walk on water. He did raise the dead. He did open the eyes of the blind. He did feed 5,000 with a few loaves and fishes. You can kill me if you want to, but I cannot deny what I know to be the truth. So the apostles, I believe from the scripture and from simple logic, were special witnesses, and we have a powerful testimony then from them that what the New Testament says about Christ is true. So then why are we talking about the last days? Well, I think the last days, the last time, as John mentions it, really began with the rejection of Christ by the Jews. Mm-hmm. And Peter, in his sermon on, if you want to call it that, on the day of Pentecost, said, what you see is what was written. The last days I'll pour out my Spirit on all
quoting
flesh.
Joel.
Right, and so forth. Well, when do the last days end? I think the last days go on through the millennial reign of Christ. This is all the last time. It's winding this thing up. Christ has come, and he has been rejected, and now he could come back at any moment. And, of course, there are many signs, and we believe the signs, the disciples asked for signs. When he said the temple would be destroyed and so forth, of course, that would mean the city would be destroyed. What will be the sign of these things and of your coming of the end of the world? They asked in Matthew 24. And Jesus then begins to give signs. And the biggest sign is apostasy, of course. False prophets will arise. False workers of miracles. They will seem to do signs and wonders and so forth. But that the rapture could occur at any moment is very clear. Luke chapter 12, for example, beginning, I think, verse 35 or somewhere around there, Jesus says, let your loins be girded, your lights burning, and you like those who watch for their Lord. That when he knocks on the door, you're ready to open. And he clearly says, in fact, in Matthew 24:44, Christ said, at such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man cometh. So he warned, watch, be ready. You could be caught by surprise. Mm-hmm. So to catch us by surprise, that means there are no signs for the rapture, but yet in Matthew 24:33-34, Christ says, this generation won't pass away until all of these things are fulfilled. And then he says, when all of these things are fulfilled, you know I'm right at the very door. Now we have a contradiction. He comes when we know he's coming, when all the signs are fulfilled? Or does he come when we wouldn't expect him? There must be two events. One, when he comes for the church and takes his bride to heaven. There will be the judgment seat of Christ, the marriage, Revelation 19. We will be clothed in white raiment, fine and clean, and then we come back with the armies of heaven. So in the rapture, he takes his saints to heaven. At the second coming, he brings them with him from heaven, as Zechariah chapter 14, verse 5, 6, somewhere around there, says that when his feet touch the Mount of Olives, he brings all the saints from heaven with him. If he brings all the saints from heaven with him, he must have taken them up there. They didn't climb up there on their own. So the fact that Christ at the second coming brings all the saints from heaven with him is clear evidence that he took them up there. That's the rapture. So no signs for the rapture. The signs are for the second coming, and I know you want to talk about those, but they're already in the world now, so the rapture must be very close.
Well, Dave, when you say the signs of the last days are warnings for Israel, not the church, that doesn't mean that we're not to take heed. You know, on the one hand, we're not to be worried about what the Antichrist is going to implement, but that doesn't happen instantly, so there's a preparation for him, which we're going to talk about. But my point is that the signs that we're going to look to, some of them are signs related to the church, aren't they?
Well, I don't think they're given as signs.
Well, apostasy,
Paul says,
falling away.
Right. Paul says that day will not come except the apostasy comes first. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. But when did the apostasy come? I think it already came. In other words, Paul says, after my departing, grievous wolves will enter in, not sparing the flock. So Jesus does say, take heed that no one deceive you. Many false Christs, false prophets will arise, and so forth. So definitely apostasy, but apostasy's been here a long time.
Right. But the development of a false church, an apostate church, we see that. That's a clear sign that it's taking place today, and probably in ways, well, we'll get into some of the other signs, in ways that they've never happened before in the history of man.
But of course, the church is not going to be here when those signs come to their fullness.
Well, correct.
Right.
Correct. But the church is being impacted by it now.
We should heed them. I mean, you can see it ahead of time. Yeah, so there are signs, definitely, and the church can see them, and some of them pertain to the church, but they don't have to occur before the rapture. That was the point.
Right. Now, this generation, the question that you pose in the book and that you answer is that this is the generation in which all, because Jesus said, when ye shall see all these things, know that that is the second coming, is near, even at the doors. Mm-hmm. So it's this generation that's part of your premise, your position, that our generation is the first to have all these signs within reach.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't think that was what Jesus meant when he said, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Tom, I haven't looked at this book, so I don't know what I said, but I hope I said the right thing.
I'm sure you did.
Because Jesus used generation, and so did John the Baptist, in a way that no one else did, very uniquely. He talked about, you generation of vipers, who has warned you to flee from the wrath to come? This disobedient, gainsaying, rebellious, perverse, faithless generation. There were two theories. One, of course, and you've dealt with that extensively, the Reconstructionists, the preterists, said, well, this generation obviously means the generation that was listening to him, that was alive at that time. Well, that couldn't be because, for example, he said, then will arise tribulation, greater than any tribulation that ever was. And we've had greater tribulation under Hitler, under Stalin, Mao. They killed more Christians and more Jews by far than the Romans ever did. So you couldn't say that Nero was the Antichrist, which these people try to say. Furthermore, Jesus said, beginning at verse 29, verse 30, and so forth, he said, there will be signs in the heavens. You will see the sign of the Son of Man coming with power and great glory, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds. Well, that certainly didn't happen in AD 70. So there were things that Jesus foretold that did not happen then. So that generation couldn't have been the generation. Then there are those who said, no, it's the generation that sees Israel back in her land. And that was a theory. Well, 1948, 40-year generation, 1988, everything will be wrapped up. Subtract the 7-year tribulation, 1981, whoa, that's when the rapture will occur. And I can remember it, Tom. We had bumper stickers, right at your own risk, I'm leaving in the rapture. Everybody was expecting it. And in those days, I don't know, we didn't know one another then, did we? 78?
That's about when we started working together.
Yeah, we had, I'm trying to think of where we were living at that time. We were living in Northridge, not in Woodland Hills, where we had lived before. But anyway, people used to say, well, what do you think? Is Christ coming? And I'd say, well, I long for his coming. I look for his coming. But I don't think he's coming right now because too many people are expecting him. He said, at such an hour as you think not, the Son of Man cometh. Well, I never believed either of those theories. There is another application, I believe, and I think it's quite clear. When Jesus said this generation, he didn't mean those living at a particular time. He meant the unbelieving, perverse, Christ-rejecting, God-disobeying generation of Israel, and that Israel would continue. Many Jews would get saved, and many are getting saved today. There are a number of them now in Israel. But that Israel as a whole would remain in unbelief until everything is fulfilled. And we just quoted from Zechariah, and Zechariah 12, verse 10 says, "They will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn." When Christ returns, everything will have been fulfilled, of course. That is when Israel will recognize him, that is, those who are left. 2/3 of the Jews on this earth will have been killed. It tells you that in Zechariah chapter 13. So the 1/3 of the Jews left, they will believe only when they see him. And this faithless, perverse, rebellious generation will have passed forever. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there is any other rational biblical interpretation we can come to.
But there is the issue of a generation that's going to see all these signs, and the potential is there for it. They're related to the second coming, but that could be the generation in which Jesus is going to return. For example, Dave, the signs that you argue for with regard to the second coming, except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. It is the capacity for man to annihilate himself. Mm-hmm. When did that ever happen before? What generation could say?
Yes, of course. There are signs today that never were present for any other generation,
right.
that a man could control all banking and commerce with a number.
Well, let's go over those. First of all, you don't lay them out number by number in your book, but you do address those, the signs that I just mentioned, and a ruler controlling the world politically, militarily, and economically. Could that have happened prior to this time?
Not prior to our modern technology with communication satellites. Big Brother can trace you anywhere, follow you. You can't get away. That was not possible before. But that the rapture and then the second coming must happen within a generation's time from those developments, I couldn't say, but I would argue rather from this point of view, Tom, and I'm not disagreeing, you're making a good point. I don't think these signs can remain in the world very long without the world destroying itself. Mm-hmm. In other words, Christ said, except those days be short, no flesh would survive. And you point out that foretells weapons of mass destruction that the earth never had. And when you put those in human hands, well, you know the old saying way back in the early days of atomic energy, we are atomic giants, but we're still moral midgets. Mm-hmm. And we have terrorists who would love to nuke with dirty nukes. New York would be uninhabitable for centuries. So it's a terrifying time, and we have developed these weapons. So from that standpoint, you could say, I don't think this is going to go on much longer. Mm-hmm. But I believe he's talking about this rebellious generation of Israel, and they will believe suddenly, and that generation will have passed.
Mm-hmm. Dave, some of our listeners, they're not familiar with the Bible. I'm sure that's the case. A number of programs ago, we went through a whole list of things, key events in the Bible, and we laid it out for people just to get an overview of what we're talking about. But I think it's important, as we mention these things, to point people to Scripture. For example, when we were talking about a ruler controlling the world economically, this is Revelation 13, verses 16 to 18. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and in their foreheads. I'm quoting this because this isn't just some Hollywood scenario, okay? Mm-hmm. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. But no man might buy or sell. Mm-hmm. So that's something that no generation prior to this one.
They didn't have the capability.
Right.
For sure. And Tom, we know that it's coming to that.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, good reasons. There'd be no more muggings on the street because there's no cash to steal from anybody. You can't steal their credit card because the mark is now in their body, a chip in the forehead or it says in the hand.
The forehead.
And we have the technology for that. We're going to have to come back and talk about this. Right now, there are some large amusement parks where you just check your kids in and they get a bracelet that they wear, and they know where that child is at every moment. And you can be a little more relaxed about them if you lose them.
We see these signs. They're preparation for the Antichrist. Some of them we're going to talk about later are conditioning, and they can impact us now. But these kinds of things, some people live in fear. Oh, I'm not going to, the coating on a can of beans. I'm not going to buy that can of beans because I'm taking the mark of the beast.
Tom, you couldn't have anticipated this. You read this 100 years ago. You wouldn't have known what it was. I'm a little bit older than you, and I can remember, I think it was in the 30s, NRA, National Something or Other Act. Recovery Act. Thank you. Wow.
You're not that much older than I am.
Okay, National Recovery Act. And I remember people saying, that's the mark of the beast. We had all kinds of ideas about that. No, it didn't even come close. You can't control the world with that. You can't control the world with a computer chip and the technology we have today. No question that we have this now.
Dave, 30 seconds left, but next week, we're going to get into more of this conditioning and things that impact believers. As you said, where the rapture will take us out prior to the establishment of the Antichrist. But there are still things that impact us, that affect us. And one of the things we see going on in the world, a conditioning with regard to worshiping Satan and the Antichrist. And this does affect us in many ways.
Yeah, that's like never before.
I'm T.A. McMahon. Thanks for tuning in to this replay of my interview with Dave Hunt that was broadcast in 2003. In next week's program, the topic is whether or not the world is being prepared to receive the son of perdition. I'd appreciate it if you would please like this episode. Your response will help more people to see our content. Please note that we are posting our content to a variety of social platforms. Go to thebereancall.org/social for a complete list. For more information about the Berean Call, including our complete radio and newsletter archives, which are available for free, please go to thebereancall.org. We invite you also to take a look at the topic pages on our website, which include valuable material on a variety of topics. Click on Topics at the top of our homepage. Most of our books are available as ebooks for free at davehunt.org. Please consider downloading our app and subscribing to our email updates. Again, thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us for our next program in this series reviewing Dave Hunt's book, Countdown to the Second Coming.